Hi Hans, my name is Amanda H. Thanks so much for sending your paper over to the Writing Center. You'll see on the screen that I have your paper up here, and then behind it is the prompt that you provided. So we'll occasionally flip through both of them just to compare in terms of, what you're doing, which prompt you used, etc., etc. So I see that on the appointment log, you wanted me to look at grammar and AP style. And, I found after reading through your work, I found three, I would say, bigger concerns that I wanted to sort of talk about, and just things that jumped out at me as important. And not to say that grammar is not important, but we only have a limited amount of time to sort of delve into your work, and I feel that these three concerns that jumped out at me are going to do you the most good. So here's what I covered basically in your paper. So the first aspect that I wanted to go over was your intro paragraph. So here's your intro here. The second concern that I wanted to go over was organization of the paper as a whole. And that has a lot to do with the prompt as well. And I'll go over that in more detail when we get to that. And then the third major question or aspect I wanted to cover was your sentence structures, and that has something to do with passive voice as well. So it's sort of related in that way. So we'll start with your intro paragraph. So I have it up here if you want to follow along on the screencast or in front of you, however you want to follow along is fine. So one thing that immediately jumped out at me for the intro is you use the pronoun you. So where you say, being enrolled in college, DePaul University more specifically, you're bound to meet someone with conflicting viewpoints from your life. You, and that jumped out at me because based off of the prompts and just the assignment in general, your audience is the DePaulia, and yes, this is a very sort of opinionated piece, but in terms of this kind of assignment, I would really err on the side of not using the second person. So you using you, that's the second person. And sometimes the trouble in terms of this kind of assignment with using your or you is that it seems like you're talking directly to the reader or addressing the reader, or the reader has to question him or herself, and that may be your goal in this, but I don't think it's necessarily the best route in terms of the perspective here. So I'd say either stick with the first person or the third person. So you already do that later, and I feel like you implement all three of those perspectives, but I'd say limit it to two or one. So you can say I in this, absolutely, because it's an opinion piece. So of course you can say I, but you can also address these realities or facts that you talk about, these perspectives, in the third person. And that would work out as well. So it's just more of like a style thing, but it's something that I wanted to bring to your attention in the intro. And then there's another part of the intro that I wanted to address too, and it's your thesis. So as you'll see here, I highlighted in yellow your thesis, and I'll read it aloud. As Americans, it's our patriotic right to be able to speak without restraints being implemented. But in my opinion, the First Amendment should protect you if you're speaking in a hurtful or harsh manner, aiming to hurt somebody either physically or emotionally. So one thing I noticed after I read your entire paper is you really focus on one aspect of free speech, and you focus on racism. And I think that's really strong because the prompt even asks you to focus your issue right here. Focus your issue. And I feel like you've really done that. However, in the thesis, you don't mention racism explicitly in the way that you do later on in the paper. And I feel like in order to prepare the reader for what's about to come, it's important that you bring up racism in some capacity in here. So that's just something to think about. And one more thing as far as your intro is you don't necessarily have to bring up racism in the first line, but the first line really doesn't give me any indication what this paper is supposed to be about. And that first line is important because it sort of sets the tone for the rest of the paper. It gives an indication for what's to come. And this doesn't really give an indication. It just seems like a very sort of general statement about conflicting viewpoints and how your viewpoint can conflict with someone else's. But there's nothing in here in this first sentence about free speech at all. So I would say try to put something in there about free speech. So right from the start, we know what you're doing here. We know where you're headed. So just a few tips for the intro. And that's basically what I wanted to cover for that. So in terms of the organization of the meat of your paper, basically. And one thing that I noticed is it seems like from the first body paragraph here all the way to the end, you talk about 2 interviews you engaged in. One was with your father, and one was with a DePaul student that you didn't really know very well. Not that at least I don't think you knew very well. And the meat of the paper, it seems like, has so much to do with the interviews and what these people said in their interviews and what they thought in their interviews, and less about what you thought. And that struck me because the assignment, it's all about your position, right? It's your opinion. So while your teacher, Maggie Collins, said that, here you will also interview people you know about these topics. Personal experience can be compelling evidence. Well, she wants you to use the information you gained from those interviews. I don't think she necessarily wants those interviews to make up the bulk of your paper. So the interviews and the information in them should really be complementary or supplemental information to your own ideas. So one thing I would say in terms of just the meat of the paper, the organization, is cut down on all the information in the paragraphs about your father and about this DePaul student. I would say maybe even just limit it to your father and keep it at that, and keep it at the most important facts he shared, and then really implement your own ideas, your own opinion about your position on race, and how that complements your father's position, and what he went through in his life. And then just in terms of the on paper type of organization, since your paper is about prompt B right here, write an essay in which you take a position on the issue of free speech. That's clear. Okay, I know you're doing that. One thing I was wondering is, why not simply add 3 body paragraphs, one that answers these 3 questions. So one paragraph for, to what degree are we entitled to say whatever we want? One paragraph for, to what degree should there be censorship of what we can say? And one paragraph for, does free speech even exist? So that's not the only way to organize, but it's a really simple, clean, easy way to do so. So I want to encourage you to at least think about that for revision purposes. And so finally, I just wanted to address sort of more local sentence structure and passive voice concerns in your paper. So just to help you, I highlighted in green sort of areas that stuck out to me as far as like passive voice. So I'll read some of these aloud. They're all in green, so you can easily see them. Being enrolled in college, to begin with, the degree of what is. When asked if he ever encountered. Secondly, in engaging my question of. When asked if he'd. Lastly, in addressing the question of. In listening to many stories, those intentionally trying to convince others to succumb to the injustices that racism is. And that last one is not really a complete sentence, but the others, very sort of passive. And just as an example, you always want to make your language, your voice, and in most anything you write into active voice. So, like here, this one's on page, the second to last here, where you say, when asked if he'd ever encountered free speech. That's passive. So how I'd make that active would be, when I asked if he'd ever encountered. And suddenly that sounds so much clearer, because the reader knows, okay, you're the one asking the question, he answered, you're doing the action, you're asking it, you're asking the question. That makes sense to me. So one thing you can do is look up on, you can easily Google passive voice versus active voice on Purdue OWL or really anywhere on the net, and you'll see really great information about how to sort of eliminate passive voice. It's a really easy way, it's really easy to eliminate them, but it's also a common problem that many writers have, me included. It's just a matter of reframing how you're thinking about your language in here. So I think doing that and changing everything I've bolded basically into active voice, it'll really do wonders to just the tone of your paper overall. So just as a recap, so your next step is to, consider eliminating the pronoun you using only first person or third person. That would really help. Incorporate something about racism into your thesis. And then in terms of the first sentence, really talk more about free speech so we know where you're headed. And then consider organizing your paper into these 3 sentence paragraphs here. It's a really easy way to do so. And then cut down on such heavy usage of the interviews and really incorporate more of your own ideas and your own opinions. And then third, really cut down on the passive voice that I just talked about. So I think if you do all of these things, you'll be in a much better position, and I think your paper will be a lot better off. And so I hope these comments prove helpful for you. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. And thanks so much, Hans. Bye-bye.